We've talked many times about custody and lobster traps and subjecting yourself to hacks and key loss in custodial platforms. What we haven't talked about as much is that custody or the lack thereof could determine the substantive survival of the various Gen 3 blockchains and why this heavily favors Cardano. Ready? Let's go. A lot of people participating in the Gen 3 blockchain space eventually get around to asking themselves a pretty scary question. That question is, hey, is this whole staking thing going to cause some problems with the regulators? In this regard, it appears that Cardano, the builders of Cardano, right at the very beginning, thought of something that a lot of other blockchains never seem to have addressed. That thing that the builders of Cardano thought about was custody. They built a proof of stake system, Ouroboros, that doesn't require you to give up custody of your ADA in order to stake. You could even keep your ADA on a hardware wallet. You could keep it on a ledger if you want to and still stake. In a lot of the blockchain world, a lot of the proof of stake blockchain world, they have slashing. This means that if you engage in some kind of malicious behavior, or even just some behavior that the protocol doesn't want you to engage in, like not doing anything for a block or whatever, the protocol will force you to forfeit your stake. I mean, let's face it, it's called a stake. They want you to forfeit it because it's at stake. So that's the way they enforce the right behaviors on the blockchain. Ouroboros does this through game theory because Ouroboros is an approximate Nash equilibrium. And you can read all about that if you want. There's tons of work you can find online about Nash equilibriums in game theory. Ouroboros doesn't have slashing. The problem with slashing is that the protocols that have slashing, they kind of want to have custody of your stake so that they can slash it when they want to. There are a lot of problems with the stake pools having custody of your coins in proof of stake systems. We covered earlier this year that the second largest Ethereum stake pool lost the keys to $75 million worth of Delegator's coin. But these kinds of lobster trap-esque problems aren't even the ones we're talking about here. We're talking about whether or not the staking protocol itself creates investment contracts that are securities. You'll remember last Tuesday, Gary Gensler, the chair of the SEC, went in front of that Senate committee with the Dragon and Warner and a bunch of people who really don't like crypto, and a bunch of allies of crypto, like Senator Lummis and Senator Toomey. So apparently, after that committee meeting, Gensler was in some kind of a conversation with this crypto news outlet, The Block, and they grabbed a couple quotes from him. I'm going to show you how they characterized this quote. I'm going to show you. So they ran this story: custodial crypto lending and staking products take on all the indicia of securities, Gensler tells The Block. Custodial crypto lending, we already knew that. Gensler said many times that he thinks crypto loans are securities, but they said custodial crypto lending and staking products take on all the indicia of securities. Their little subheadline down here is, speaking to The Block after the hearing, Gensler indicated that crypto lending and even staking platforms were likely to fall under the scope of U.S. securities law. So this is pretty scary, especially if you're participating in some kind of a proof of stake blockchain, probably like the vast majority of people watching this video. If we go down here a little bit further, the next paragraph says, Securities Exchange Commission Chairman Gensler indicated Tuesday that crypto lending and staking platforms that hold custody of user funds could fall under U.S. securities laws, and as a result, his agency's oversight. So this is important. This is important. And we'll look at his actual quote, and you can decide for yourself how correctly The Block is characterizing this. But if we take this at face value, if what Gensler's saying is that crypto staking platforms that hold custody of user funds are the ones the SEC might characterize as falling under the U.S. securities laws, then this is a huge advantage for Cardano, because Cardano staking pools do not have custody of your funds. But in Ethereum and a lot of these blockchains with slashing, they kind of need to have custody of your funds so they can slash them. We've also talked about how the Solana documents seem to talk a lot about Casper and slashing as well. So if we play this out a little bit, I mean, what would that look like? Let's say the SEC does decide that stake pools having custody of funds is a problem. I mean, what are these competitor blockchains like Ethereum and Solana left to do? It's not like Vitalik can just come out and say, okay, guys, it looks like stake pools having custody is a huge problem, so we're going to do something else. I mean, what would their new consensus protocol look like? Their proof of stake protocol, I mean, can it really look like anything other than Ouroboros? I mean, it comes out, isn't it going to end up looking like Ouroboros if they can't have custody, which kind of means they can't have slashing? Just to play devil's advocate, I guess somebody could argue that you could dream up some kind of a protocol where you don't give up custody of your coins, you're participating in staking, and if the protocol finds you guilty of malicious behavior, somehow the protocol itself just delete your coins from the chain without you ever having given up custody. But I mean, that kind of flies in the face of the whole censorship resistance thing that these public permissionless decentralized blockchains are supposed to be doing, right? However you dice it, I think it's a pretty big challenge for these competitor blockchains if their stake pools can't have custody of the coins that are staked. No matter how unfortunate this would be for blockchains that have stake pools that take custody of the stake, when you look at the actual Howey test, you can see how a guy like Gensler would come to that kind of a take. So the actual Howey test says that you've got an investment contract when you have a contract, transaction, or scheme whereby a person invests his money in a common enterprise and is led to expect profits solely from the efforts of the promoter or a third party. We've covered this in detail many times in this channel, so we're not going to go into a ton of detail here. But you notice the first prong is a person invests his money in a common enterprise. In Cardano, they had this really important idea, apparently from the start. And that idea was, what if proof of stake delegation of your ADA doesn't involve you sending your ADA anywhere? What if you could even keep it on a hardware wallet like a ledger? So then we have to ask this question, are you really investing anything anywhere if your funds never leave your own account? Does anybody really think that a guy like Charles wasn't thinking about securities law when he built that into Cardano? The guy that held his ICO in Japan in compliance with Japanese law and didn't allow any Western investors. Do you think that he didn't build this with a view to the Howey test? So why would Ethereum not go the same direction as Cardano here when this seems to be so obvious? I think slashing is the intellectually easy answer, right? It's the easiest answer to come to. You think about society in general and how we prevent behaviors we don't want to see. How do you stop people from running stop signs in traffic, in the street, in a normal city? You fine them, right? Cop sees you run a stop sign, he's going to write you a ticket, you get a fine. If you do it too much, they actually jail you. Obviously, blockchains can't jail people, at least not yet. Hopefully never. But currently, there's no blockchain ability to jail people that I know of. But they can fine people. And that's the way a lot of these blockchains want to control malicious activities by their block validators, slashing. I think, honestly, a lot of these competitor blockchains just weren't as worried about securities law because a lot of them had already done ICOs that were available to US investors. So I think they thought, hey, if we're going to get in trouble with securities regulators, we're already going to get in trouble over our ICOs. So we might as well just go with the intellectually easy answer as to how we encourage the right behavior by our block validators. A lot easier than creating a provably secure proof of stake blockchain protocol that is an approximate Nash equilibrium like Cardano did. Now that we've explored the issue, let's look at what the block says Gensler actually said. So as a little bit of a side issue here, it looks like they're reporting he also said, if you are offering a lending product, it is quite likely that the lending product itself is under the securities laws. I think he's made this pretty clear. He definitely regards crypto loans as largely falling under the SEC's purview. Like, I think he thinks a lot of those crypto loans are definitely securities. He's made that clear in a lot of different speeches, including the Aspen Forum speech, I believe. Kind of the same thing with synthetics. He's been really strong on synthetics being securities and also these loan products. But getting to the meat of what we're actually talking about here, here's what the block says he actually said. And apparently this was in conversation after his testimony before the banking subcommittee that we discussed in a video earlier this week. He said, I would note to your readers that if you're investing on a centralized exchange or a centralized lending platform, you no longer own your token. Okay, so I think we all kind of knew that. If you send your token to Coinbase, not your coin, not your keys, and in fact, the block even makes that comparison here. But he also says, you've transferred ownership of the platform. All you have is a counterparty risk, and that platform might be saying, as many of them do, we'll give you a 4% or 7% return if you stake your coins with us or you actually transfer ownership, and we, the platform, will stake your tokens. That takes on all the indicia of what Congress is trying to protect under the securities laws. So this to me is a little bit more nuanced than the title that the block kind of ran with. Because if you look at their title, if you look at this title, it says custodial crypto lending and staking products take on all the indicia of securities. But there's some additional nuance here. I mean, Gensler at the beginning of this quote is definitely talking about centralized exchanges or centralized lending platforms. And he does talk about staking, but he never sort of says, hey, we're talking about staking generally here, including decentralized staking in all of its forms. But we've also seen Gensler say that he doesn't believe most, okay, maybe he hasn't said most, but he has definitely said that he believes a lot of DeFi platforms are actually centralized through things like governance tokens. And let's face it, most of the big DeFi platforms we know of do have governance tokens. And we also know that the SEC is investigating Uniswap. So it doesn't appear that decentralization is a great shield to your platform being guilty of some kind of securities violations in the eyes of Gensler. So obviously you could argue that maybe this is all just about Coinbase. I think everybody knows about the, we'll call it a disagreement between Coinbase and the SEC over its Coinbase Lend product. That was all over Twitter. And if you're an Ethereum fan, I know you're probably jumping up right now and you're saying, but SEC staff said that Ethereum's not a security. True, but that was when Ethereum was just proof of work. Ethereum proof of stake, Ethereum 2.0, could be a completely different thing in the eyes of the SEC. So we don't really know. And I mean, to be fair, it's not clear what he's talking about here. They're definitely talking about staking, and he's definitely talking about custody, and he's definitely talking about centralized platforms. But we also know that he thinks a lot of decentralized platforms are centralized. So it's very unclear here whether he's applying the same thinking about staking to decentralized platforms as he is to centralized platforms. But I think the most important thing here is that he's talking about staking. We haven't really seen, I haven't seen Gensler talk about staking before. He's talked about crypto loans. He's talked about ICOs. He's talked about crypto synthetics. He's talked about DeFi generally. I haven't seen him talk about staking like this, sort of just as a general concept. But regardless of whether he's just talking about centralized staking platforms or centralized and decentralized staking platforms, it's obvious that he's very focused on custody. So if the SEC ever were to put proof of stake in its crosshairs, it seems like Cardano might have a huge advantage because the stake pools don't take custody. One final note on custody, guys. We are now in the smart contract era of Cardano, and a lot of projects are going to start coming online now that we have smart contracts. And some of these projects are calling themselves non-custodial, but it's important to investigate when you see that, because I think a lot of people are coming to possibly some wrong conclusions about what that means. I think the projects are using that in a different sense than some people are understanding it. I think a lot of people are seeing this word non-custodial and they're thinking to themselves, oh, it's non-custodial. That means I keep custody. That means my funds are totally safe. They're going to stay in my wallet and there's no chance that I can lose those funds. But I think a lot of projects are using this term non-custodial in the same sense that Aave is using the term non-custodial right here. But if you go to the Aave FAQ, you see little bits of information like this. How do I interact with the Aave protocol? You simply deposit your asset. And you're like, wait a second. Okay, you guys are saying that you guys are non-custodial, but I'm definitely depositing my asset somewhere. So maybe I don't have custody of it either. Then you see this one down here. Where are my deposited funds stored? Your funds are allocated in the smart contract. The coded smart contract is public. You can withdraw your funds from the pool on demand or export a tokenized version of your lender position. Obviously, Aave is an Ethereum product, but we're just comparing here so that people can see what Cardano projects might be modeling their use of that term on. This section down here might be most important. Is there any risk? Aave says, no platform can be considered entirely risk-free. The risks related to the Aave platform are the smart contract risk. And they go on to talk about other categories of risk, but they're straight up telling you, hey, there might be a bug within the protocol code that might be exploited by someone or otherwise lead to risks to anything you deposit with us. That's not the same as my definition of custody. I would say if you're maybe the Aave protocol is non-custodial, but it sounds like the smart contract definitely has custody of your assets, and you do not necessarily have custody of your assets. I think people need to keep this in mind. I think a lot of people are coming to the conclusion when they see Cardano projects say that they're non-custodial, they're thinking, oh, that means the assets stay in my wallet. But you really need to look at the white papers of these projects and ask yourself, okay, is use of this project, this platform, involving me depositing my Cardano somewhere? If that's the case, it might be something more similar to Aave, where your assets are not staying in your wallet, they're going somewhere, you're depositing them somewhere, and you're subjected to all of the same types of risks that Aave is describing here. There will be, in Cardano, there will be hacks and exploits and rug pulls and all these things. So be aware, even if a project is applying this label non-custodial to itself, that still might not mean that you get to retain custody, in which case you might be subjecting yourself to all these lobster trap type risks. I won't talk to you tomorrow because I'm going to take a day off, but I'll probably talk to you the next day.